and gentlemen, welcome back to Power Vacuum. I'm your host, Belmont, and we've got a interesting story today regarding GTA 6. Saw this headline and I thought, boy, they must have lost their mind over at Rockstar. This is from Insider Gaming. Former GTA dev thinks GTA 6 players might prefer 30 frames per second over 60 frames per second. I'm going to go ahead and take a brief pause right there to bring a small PSA to whoever made this comment. Um, People have refused to buy games that did not support 60 frames per second. Those people will still refuse to buy games. This will not help sales. This will hinder sales big time. Frames per second has become one of the major arguments when it comes to dealing with next gen consoles and, you know, PC gaming because that's the draw, higher frames per second. There are people out there that want 120 frames per second even though logistically your brain cannot process more than 30, they still want those high end frames per second. So this reasoning makes absolutely no sense. But there's my little PSA. Let's jump into this article and see what Insider Gaming has to say. Grand Theft Auto 6 will dominate 2026 even if the game can't hit 60 frames per second. I don't deny that. I just think if it doesn't, it will hurt its sales. We won't see the massive release that we saw for Red Dead Redemption 2, in my opinion, if this rumor is true. A former dev thinks 30 frames per second might be the way forward for Rockstar Games and GTA 6 players anyway, and it's considered a trade off. Obi Vermeij? Obi Vermeij is a former Rockstar Games technical lead who worked on peak GTA games in the PS2 and PS3 era. In early July, Vermeij claimed GTA 7 will be cheaper to make than GTA 6 because of AI. Now they're suggesting that even though players seem desperate for 60 frames per second, GTA 6 might be a better experience overall in 30 frames per second. Vermeij was asked on X, "Hey, Obi Vermeij, in your opinion, why is it so difficult for GTA 6 to reach 60 frames per second on base consoles, or is it actually possible?" One of the biggest talking points in GTA 6 being so big and ambitious is that it won't be able to hit 60 frames per second, maybe not even on PS5 Pro. Vermeij replied to the comment, "It's a trade off. At 30 frames per second, you can render twice as many polygons compared to 60 frames per second. For a competitive action game, you always go for the high frame rate, but for GTA, you might prefer the visual details." In essence, even if GTA 6 can hit 60 frames per second, the higher graphical fidelity offered by 30 frames per second could be the best way to truly enjoy Rockstar's efforts. If Rockstar can manage to flip the high frames per second crowd on their head with this, I will be astounded. I will do a video of me just eating crow pie. I don't know where I'll get the crow pie. Metaphorically, I know exactly where I'll get it, but man, I will be blown away if that isn't a major deterrent for people. If GTA 6 can only hit 60 frames per second on a PS5 Pro, will you upgrade? Or if it's recommended, is 30 frames per second more than sufficient? Let us know through the Insider Gaming Forum. I'm torn on this as I usually opt for performance-based settings where possible. That's it. That's that's the whole. Well, all right. Short and sweet, straight to the point. But yeah, uh, will I upgrade? No, I don't even own a PS5. I have not purchased one yet because I don't purchase. I refuse to purchase any more Sony machines until they stop the endless cycle of remakes and remasters that they have fallen into. There are now more remakes for PlayStation 5 than there are original drop titles, which is ridiculous. Right? What's my incentive to buy your new console if I'm just going to be playing old games? Right? What's the incentive? And everything else you release, I can play on PC or Xbox. It doesn't matter. But the incentive to buy a PlayStation isn't there anymore. But I digress. This is a big deal. Whether or not GTA can actually hit 60 frames per second is going to be a making or breaking point, because just that's just where we stand. That's one of the major battles that happens online in the forums, is people complaining about not being able to get 60 frames per second, not being able to maximize their video card or their RAM or whatever, you know, that's it really. Video cards and RAM are what you need to run 60 frames per second really. And it's just, it's going to deter people if you don't offer that. If you have no way of doing it at all, say you go in and you're like, yeah, you can do 60 frames per second, but you know, turn off ray tracing and turn off dynamic shadows, and there you go. You can have your 60 frames per second. But if you just outright say, sorry, womp womp, 30 frames per second, that's the game you get, there will be a large group of people who just won't play your game. Or they will sit there, and if you are doing a console only release like you did with Red Dead Redemption 2, where the first 6 months or year, was it a year? I think it was a year. For the first year, it's only on console and not on PC. The 60 frames per second crowd will wait for the PC version and wait for a mod that scales it up to 60 frames per second, which will hurt your sales in the short run and make your game look like it's not as popular. But, that's my take on the situation. Only time will tell with this one. And again, if they manage to flip the 60 frames per second crowd on its head and get them to buy into this game at 30 frames per second, I will be impressed, and I will do a follow-up video talking about how I was wrong and I misjudged this one. But right as it where it stands right now, I think they're hurting themselves. And that's all I have for this video. This is your host Belmont, signing out.